pronoun, city, and your favorite food or something along those lines in the chat. And I'll probably get started in about 5 minutes.
It's awesome to see some of our regular volunteers coming for MLK also.
Oh, Tatiana, we can see both of your screens right now, just so you know.
Okay.
Hi to everyone just joining now. We're going to get started in like 3 or 4 minutes, but just so everyone has a chance to get on. But if you want to introduce yourself in the chat, you can say maybe your names, pronouns, where you're located, and a favorite food, perhaps. Oh, we got a lot of New York people on here. Very cool.
Brooklyn, New York pizza. Had some of that yesterday.
Sometimes you got to specify Brooklyn, New York pizza. Not
Oh,
pizza.
Like, it says favorite food. I only just noticed that.
All right, yeah, I guess we'll get started in just 1 more minute.
I love these responses. I didn't know what to say at the last meeting, so I just said raspberries.
That's a good answer. That's fine.
Ooh.
Okay, great. Well, it looks like we have a pretty good amount of people who have registered on, so okay, great. Like, yeah, I think, oh, sorry.
I was just going to say I think there are some are on our end that are separate, that are like on a different system too.
Oh, okay. Yeah, we can give it give it 1 more minute maybe. Oh, sugar cookies are so good.
Yeah, I love sugar.
Sugar and salt.
Yeah. Definitely. Any kind of sweets. It's really deep down inside my favorite.
Okay, great. Yeah, I think we should probably get started now. But thank you everyone for coming. I know we're still inviting folks in, but we'll get started a little bit. My name is Linnea. I'm the National Volunteer Coordinator at Hunger Free America. And yeah, so the work that I kind of do at Hunger Free America is helping with our volunteer needs, matching volunteers to different work that would be best for them, things along those lines. We've also organized this MLK Serve-a-Thon. Thank you all for coming. And we like to start off with a land acknowledgement. So I'm speaking from the physical space of New York City. So I'd like to acknowledge the land on which I currently reside, which historically was that of the Lenape, Canarsie, Rockaway, and Wappinger Indigenous peoples. We deliver a land acknowledgement to acknowledge the historical legacy of colonialism, by honoring and paying respect to the land, which was taken by conquest, along with the domination of the people who inhabited the land and the imposition of white supremacy. We do this to raise greater public consciousness of Native sovereignty and cultural rights as a small step towards equitable relationship and reparation. So we encourage everyone on today's call to privately acknowledge the land that sustains and supports you. So if you don't already know your own area's history, we've provided a link in the chat to learn more about the Indigenous peoples that live or lived in your area. So I think Tatiana has put that in the chat for everyone to look at. So if you are new to Hunger Free America, HFA, as we call ourselves, is a nonpartisan national nonprofit, and we're helping to build the movement to enact the policies and programs needed to end domestic hunger and ensure that all Americans have sufficient access to nutritious food. So we do this through both our direct service work and our advocacy work, which we feel strengthen each other and work together to help fight for food justice in our communities here and beyond. HFA is a very far-reaching nonprofit. So yeah, and as I said, I work on our volunteerism team. So, and later on, we'll be talking a little bit more about our other volunteering opportunities if anyone is interested. We are also going to be sharing a link in the chat to a Google Drive folder that will contain all the resources and information we're speaking about in this event for your future reference. So if there's things we're talking about today that you'd like to learn more about, we'll be sure to share that link with you. Just a little bit more about HFA before we get going a little more is that we find that our work to end hunger right now is more pressing than ever. According to a report published by HFA in July of 2020, so quite recently, the United States is facing the greatest hunger crisis in modern times, with more than 1 in 3 children missing meals or suffering from reduced portion sizes because their families don't have enough money for food. And the rate of child hunger is 5 times higher than before the pandemic, and adult hunger is 2.5 times higher. So it's clear that COVID has had a really big impact on people's ability to access food. And as domestic hunger increases, all types of low-income families are suffering, but data shows that people of color are impacted at higher rates. And HFA data shows that in the spring and summer of this year, sorry, I just clicked something stupid on my computer here. Sorry, I clicked away from my tab. But HFA data shows that in the spring and the summer of this year, 41.4% of Black respondent households experienced food insecurity, as did 36.9% of Hispanic respondent households. And that's all in contrast to 23.2% of white respondent households. So it's clear that people of color are facing food insecurity at a much higher rate. And so as a global pandemic and demands for racial justice collide, we think it's more important than ever to lift up MLK's message of justice. For over 2 decades, Hunger Free America has honored Martin Luther King Jr.'s legacy by coordinating service events and volunteer action supporting long-term solutions to hunger. So with this year's Serve-a-Thon, our hope is that our volunteers will learn something new and take some action in the fight against hunger, as well as take away some ideas on how to continue working towards and supporting a more equitable economy. So we're gonna move along to our group norms slide here. And as we get going with our workshop, I'd just like to introduce some of the group norms that we have to frame our dialogue. So number 1, we call this a safe space, but we also call it a brave space, which we're more inclined to call it a brave space, where we accept the likelihood that we'll be uncomfortable when investigating these issues we're talking about today of race and privilege and oppression and the roles that we play in all of that. We also work to recognize our privileges. So we use this space to recognize and investigate those things, for example, class, gender, sexual orientation, ability, and honor the different experiences that we bring to this space. We also ask that hope that you feel comfortable to take risks and lean into the discomfort. We're all in process and we're all hoping to challenge ourselves and contribute, even if our thoughts might not be perfectly formulated, but we encourage you to feel comfortable to still participate. We also hope that everyone will actively listen and use your energy to listen to what's being said and thinking about how you'd like to respond, and notice when any defensive or denial arises in yourself. So those are the group norms that we present. If anyone else has any additional things to add, we welcome you to put them in the chat. We just hope we can all, all listen to these group norms and hope we can bring them into the conversation. So now, after this, I'd like to introduce the theme of our workshop and our co-host. So I'd like to introduce our co-host first, Alana Asher. Alana is a senior fellow with Repair the World Brooklyn. She recently completed her first year at Repair the World, where she lived and worked in Harlem. She's become a part of the Jewish community in New York City and looks forward to continuing to strengthen those relationships she's created. And additionally, through working closely with her community and spending time at organizations like Hunger Free America and East Harlem Tutorial Program, Alana has learned a lot more about New York City and inequity and the severity of issues such as food justice and racial justice, as well as their intersection with one another in the city. And living in Harlem, Alana has learned about how gentrification affects neighborhoods and how her own presence has a tangible impact that can be harmful. And she hopes to use this experience to continue to work responsibly in New York City. And during her additional year at Repair, she will work to fight against systemic issues such as anti-Black racism that are exacerbated through gentrification. So that's Alana. So I'm going to pass it over to her now.
Hi all, my name's Alana. I'm also here with Sam, who's going to be leading a bunch of the learning as well with all of you. Sam, I don't have a bio for him, but if I did, it would be incredible because Sam is awesome. But I'm going to share our presentation with you and introduce Repair the World. And then we can get going. We're going to learn a little bit about, we're going to learn a little more background on food justice as it has been talked about by different faith leaders and as it is, and how the outcomes and solutions are discussed as well within different faiths. Let me share here it is. I think this is right. Yes, perfect.
Almost perfect.
not quite.
If you need me to share it, I can do that.
I got it. Okay, now it's perfect, possibly, almost. We're good?
Yeah.
Okay. So actually, I think we can introduce Repair the World real quick first. Makes a little more sense. Repair the World is a national Jewish nonprofit. We work to mobilize Jews as well as their communities to take action to pursue a just world. So we do this primarily through partnering with organizations that already exist in our communities and have identified the needs of their communities. Rather than bringing projects to our communities, we bring our work and our volunteers and we see how we ask how we can help. And we try to come in without making any assumptions. So today we are partnering with our awesome organization, Hunger Free America. We've been partnering with them for quite a while. They do amazing work to impact social change around food justice and hunger as well. And their phone banking project is one that we've been fortunate to be able to help with a good deal, especially since the beginning of the COVID-19 pandemic. And with that, we can start our presentation. And I'll hand it over to Sam.
Thanks, Alana. As Alana said, my name's Sam Sittenfeld. I use he and him pronouns. And I work on Repair the World staff. But when I was a fellow a couple of years ago in a similar position to Alana, I had the privilege of working with Hunger Free America as well, doing work to support people who are trying to access SNAP benefits and trying to get information and trying to submit applications to get the food that's owed to them, the food that they deserve. And so it's always good to get to volunteer with such a wonderful organization. Alana, are we doing this slide or are we hopping over to the agenda? I feel like we owe folks to know what the rest of their time is they've got with us. So you can see we've got some time. We've put in our time on welcome and intros, and we're going to spend a bit of time, I think the next 30 to 45 minutes, talking about and discussing food justice, food insecurity, thinking about that more, bringing our own experiences, our own knowledge, and relying on some that exists there already, including from some faith sources. Then we're going to get on with our phone bank training and phone banking before we spend a little bit of time debriefing, reflecting on the experience. So we're including some learning, action, and also reflection to tie things together. And I think also for just other sort of tech important things to note, Tatiana is our tech person. So if you're having any technical issues, send a private message. If you have other kinds of things, if you have like a question you want to ask but don't want other people to see, you can send it the private message to myself or to Alana, and we'll make sure it gets addressed and elevated in a useful, helpful way. Yeah, let's do that next slide, Alana. So our first question, we're sort of coming here together and thinking about this. I think we've tossed it around a little bit, this word food insecurity. We've also said food justice. We'll get there in a second. But food insecurity, it feels like kind of a clinical or a technical kind of term, but I would love for us to sort of, as a group, put together a layperson's definition. What do you think, what does it mean to you to be food insecure? And you can toss things in the chat. I'm also, if people want to unmute themselves, if they're able to, and share, would love to hear people's voices too. What does it mean to be food insecure? Yeah, go for it. Eva or Ava?
Oh, it's Ava. So I think it means to not know where your next meal is to come, like where it's going to come from, and to sometimes have to make a decision, kind of like the image shows, of whether or not you're going to get food or pay rent or take care of another necessity.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing that, Ava. Totally spot on pieces of it. You said not knowing where your next meal is going to come from. That's a definition that's like very common, and also helps us really sort of sit and think about what does that mean in a practical way. So I thank you for bringing that. We see some people in the chat as well. Noah wrote, to be in a situation where the ability to buy food is not always there. That's really amazing, because it's both about, there's elements of economic components, there's an element of access and food access, which is a different term, but still really, really important to know that you could have the money, you could have the resources, but you might not have access to the food. And that dives a little bit deeper into some of the different elements of food justice. Ariana wrote, having to choose between a secure living and securing food. Yeah. What is it? Secure living. There are so many things that are important elements of the basics, the necessities, what I might consider to be a right. What are rights that Americans should be owed, or that people living in America should be owed? Things like housing, education, food, water, and when you have to and healthcare, things like that. When you have to choose between those things, it creates immense insecurity. Immense insecurity. Cass wrote, not having choice in the foods you eat. Yeah, there's definitely, I think that jumps in, and we'll talk about food justice, but I think that sort of moves into there. Some people like to use the term food sovereignty, where you have more control over your food system, but being able to choose the foods that you eat is important. Maybe you have specific dietary restrictions for health purposes, or for religious purposes, or otherwise cultural. When you can't choose the foods you eat, you don't get to live the full expression of your life, of what you want to be in the world. So thank you for those who shared. And I know there's lots of other thoughts brewing, and we'll make sure that there's time for others to share and to talk. But let's hop to the next slide and hit that first definition. So this is a definition, but I think everything that we said is important and to bring into this. So the first, we have food security and insecurity. Can someone be a reader, read that first paragraph for us? Sarah, go for it.
Food insecurity. Or food security or food insecurity. So food security is a state when people have access to sufficient, safe, and nutritious food. That means their dietary needs and food preferences for an active and healthy life. There can be food insecurity with and without hunger.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so that hits on some of the things that we were talking about, that there's access, that the food is safe and nutritious and meets their dietary needs. And that sort of brings this really interesting and sort of tension of there can be food insecurity with hunger and there can be food insecurity without hunger. Both of those things could exist. Can someone, can we have one other person be our reader to talk about food justice, which is a little bit of a larger category? I think I saw Michaela. Michaela, would you mind reading? Or was that Madison, and then I accidentally read your last name wrong. Madison, would you mind being our reader?
Yeah, sure. Food justice is fair access to fresh, healthy, affordable food and fair wages and treatment of those who harvest, prepare, and serve it.
Thanks, Madison. So this is something that's bigger and beyond the first point that we were talking about around food insecurity. And I think it falls under the umbrella, and it's important to us while we're looking at and addressing food security to recognize that it's part of a larger system of injustice or a system of justice that we want to create in this world. And holding both of those things at the same time is important and part of our work as volunteers, as active citizens, all of those things. I wanted to just point and highlight some different, or can people say like what's involved in food justice that's not involved in food security? What do we see in that, in the definition, the concept of food justice that we don't necessarily see in food insecurity, because food justice is a larger category? Alexandra, go for it.
Well, it looks like food insecurity deals primarily with those who don't have access all the time to food, whereas food justice looks at like hunger and treating food insecurity through both the lens of those who need the food and those who serve it. Yeah,
love that. So we're looking, it's a larger systems view. It's looking at the people who produce the food, the people who are part of the manufacturing and the service industry. I would add pieces of how do we get rid of our food in a way that's safe and safe for the environment. And also, I think there are pieces that aren't necessarily held exactly in this definition, but are important for us to acknowledge about the environmental impact of our food, of our creating and disposing of food and transporting food and manufacturing food, and animal welfare, and those pieces are really important to consider as well. Like, how are we treating the animals that are part of this agricultural system, that are part of this food system that's so large and employs a huge number of folks in our economy? So how all of the stakeholders, how are they impacted, and how do we make sure that they're not harmed by the very system that's feeding them and that's feeding us? Okay, that was a lot of different pieces. So if there are more questions in the chat, they can come through, but we're gonna move on to the next piece where we're talking about, the slide's already up, how has COVID-19 affected food insecurity in the US? We have some options there, and I think Alana's gonna share a poll in the chat that you can respond to, and then we can see what folks have seen or what folks perceive. So I'm going to read this out loud while we get that into the chat, or maybe I'll put it in the chat because Alana's sharing her screen, and that will be, I think it will be easier for me to put it into the chat. So copy that link into your browser and then check out what we have here, and let me read out what we have on the screen at the same time for those who are auditory learners versus visual learners. Okay, so take a guess at this. which of these is an actual effect of COVID-19 on hunger relief programs? And thinking, remember, food insecurity, hunger relief is the work to alleviate or relieve food insecurity. A, pantries have 25% fewer clients because people are relying more heavily on SNAP, formerly known as food stamps. SNAP stands for Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, and it's additional money that people get on basically the equivalent of a credit card or a debit card if you qualify, that's a whole other conversation. And the difficulties and the frustrations around that. But it's a way supposed to supplement your food budget for a given month. B, in New York City, over a third of the pantries and kitchens shut down during the height of the pandemic. Or C, the number of pantries in New York doubled during the height of the pandemic in order to respond to growing need for food assistance. Alana, have we started to get any responses on the back end?
I'm trying to pull that up now. I might have to actually stop sharing my screen too.
Okay.
As well.
Presentation is waiting to begin. I will read over these ones again so that you have sense, and Alana.
I'll stop sharing my screen.
Yeah, go for that. I'll read it again in case it didn't come through the first time while Alana's setting up the back end. You can click on that link, and in a moment, it will be ready for you to enter and say which one of these is the one that I think happened, is the truth. Okay, so I'll read them again. Which of these is an actual effect of COVID-19 on hunger relief programs? A, pantries have 25% fewer clients because people are relying more heavily on SNAP, formerly known as food stamps. B, in New York City, over a third of the food pantries and kitchens shut down during the height of the pandemic. Or C, the number of pantries in New York City doubled during the height of the pandemic in order to respond to the growing need for food assistance. Okay, we're still waiting on the poll. Alana, should we just put it have people write in the chat what they think the answer is?
You guys hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, sorry, I didn't know if I was on mute. I'm getting there, but yeah, I guess maybe it'll be easier to have people start putting it in the chat.
All right, so pop it in the chat. Sometimes the technology doesn't work. That's what happens. And we gotta adapt, gotta go with the flow. Okay, I'm seeing a good number of B's, a C with a question mark, and another C, two C's with a question mark, B and an A. All right. Okay.
Now I can start presenting again.
Okay, great. So, and obviously the answer to this is not great. It's really sad and upsetting, but I appreciate folks hopping in and putting their thoughts and putting yourself out there, because it's sometimes weird to answer a question and be like, I don't know what the answer is necessarily. But
this was a tricky one.
As we said in the opening, that we're trying to create a brave space. So we appreciate everyone for using their voice and their keypad.
Yes.
Okay, Alana, bring us to the next slide, which has the answer to this.
It was sort of tricky the way that some of the answers were worded, so no worries there.
So the correct answer was B, that over a third of food pantries and soup kitchens were shut down during the height of the pandemic. So over 1/3. There were a lot of programs running in New York City and all over the country. And this is not just something that happened in New York. In cities all over the US and not in cities, there were many, many food pantries, many, many soup kitchens, many, many emergency food providers that shut down during the height of the pandemic. So we'd love to know from you, and this is another time that you can unmute, why did this happen? And why might this have happened? There are different reasons, but why might this have happened? And what are the real world implications of this? And you can choose to answer one or more of those questions. feel free to raise your hand or unmute yourself or put your thoughts in the chat. Why would over 1/3 of the food pantries and soup kitchens shut down during the height of the pandemic? Manal, I'm sorry if I'm pronouncing your name wrong, but go for it.
Yeah, that's fine. It's Manel.
Manal,
But I think this happened because because of self-isolation, there were less customers available for the marketplaces, food pantries, and a lot of small businesses in general. So since they weren't getting enough customers, they weren't getting enough money and had to shut down.
Yeah, thanks, Manal. Yeah, I think you touched on some different things, some different important elements there. Like one, the fact that fewer people were going, or there were some people who were going before who were no longer willing and able to go to food pantries because they were worried about being sick, especially thinking about the elderly and others. That's like a big thing. And then you also talked about funding. You compared it in a really interesting way to restaurants who were not seeing, right, when fewer people were going to restaurants, the restaurants had less income and they might not have been able to support their staff and continue on and had to shut down. And similarly, that's not exactly how nonprofits work, but nonprofits rely on funding. And if that funding dries up because there's so much need and there's so much economic insecurity, that will also be, if they lose their income there, if they lose their source of income, they might not be able to sustain themselves as well. I see there's some good stuff going on in the chat, so I want to review that. Maybe Alana can share what was happening in the chat, and then after that, Sasha, you can go ahead.
Yeah, there's some really great points in the chat. Sarah pointed out that a lot of people who work at food pantries are senior citizens. Many people are in retirement and they have taken this on as their full-time volunteer work. So they were a lot of these people were unable to work at the pantries and keep it open. Maddie has also pointed out that volunteers in general that would have gone there couldn't when there were COVID safety protocols put in place. It's also good to note that many of these pantries would continuously try to open up, but because someone on staff would get COVID, you then have to shut down everything for a couple of weeks. So pantries would continuously have to shut down and again, wouldn't receive enough funding or wouldn't be able to continue everything and keep it going for a consistent amount of time. And I think people are really touching on that in the chat.
There was someone, was it Sasha, who just had their hand raised? If you want to say anything.
Yes, I think what I was kind of gonna say has been touched on, but I was reading an article about this the other day, actually, before I even knew about this program. But I think it's just this combination of there's not a lot of funding going to these food banks as there was before from outside resources or restaurants giving extra food and volunteers not feeling safe going in. And also the demand has skyrocketed due to unemployment rates and just the COVID in general having an effect on people and their livelihood. So I think it's just the combination of this extreme demand that wasn't there before. And on top of that, there's these people there's a lack of volunteers and there's a lack of food.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think one of the things that was important there that you brought up is around our second question. What are the real world implications? We remember, or I would assume, maybe it's bad to assume going back to our things, but I certainly remember from the beginning of the pandemic reading all those articles about folks experiencing unemployment. And while those articles may not still be running, those things are still happening. And there's still job loss that's happening due to the pandemic. There's still a lot of people who are experiencing unemployment. And that means that there are more people who are in need of these services and are not receiving them. And there's more interest and more need on the side of the food pantries, and a third of them shut down. So it's really creating this difficult experience. And to the point that Alana was saying, there are a lot of places that if there is a confirmed COVID case there, they got to shut down because they have to keep everyone on their staff safe. They got to keep all the clients safe, everyone, and so that leads to things like unpredictable hours that make it even harder on folks who are trying to access those services. So we'll get to that. That's sort of part of why we're here and what we're doing today. Alana, do you want to take us to the next slide? So this is like a little bit of background context information for this moment, for this COVID moment, and also thinking about how it is disproportionately affecting Black and Brown households. So the quick statistic here, and you can read it along on the screen with me, is that households are disproportionately affected by food insecurity, and it's getting worse. In 2018, 25% of Black households with children and 17% of Hispanic households with children were food insecure. Now, there's something on the right that's also really bad on the right side of the screen, but I just want to take us a moment to remember that this left side of the screen means that we are not doing well. 25% of Black households with children, 1 in 4 Black households with children were experiencing food insecurity. That's a national catastrophe already before COVID-19. So I wanted to call that because I think it's really important for us to remember when we're looking at statistics. It can be really hard. It can be hard to humanize them and just to sort of hold that at the same time. And now with the numbers on 2020, that 39% of Black households, so that's 14% more with children, and 37% of Hispanic households with children are currently food insecure. And there's numbers on the bottom that sort of give us comparison numbers versus white folks. This is really bad. It was a catastrophe before. It's even worse now. What are we to do about it? Well, thanks for showing up today. That's what we're going to be doing. We're going to be taking a step towards that. Okay, let's do our next slide. I don't know why the formatting came up that way, but can you click? Yeah, there we go. Okay, so yeah, that's good. Okay, so we've got some wisdom quotes. I always find it useful, interesting, and helpful to think about, to bring some of that into play, because it helps us sort of take a broader perspective, recognizing that people have been struggling with these ideas, with these issues for thousands of years, if not longer, to say to us, that it's something that is larger, that others have faced and have worked on and have had success on in the past, to give us encouragement, hope, pride, knowledge that we can do, that our work can be meaningful in this as well. So the first text on the top comes from the Babylonian Talmud, Tractate Gittin 61a. The Babylonian Talmud is a compendium of Jewish wisdom that comes from about a century, millennium and a half ago. That's the one. Had to run through all of them, not a century, not a decade. So 1600 years ago, which is a long time. And there's so much wisdom to be learned from those times. And it has lots of different things. It's a commentary on the Bible. It has lots of anecdotes and stories and laws and different things like that. But this is one piece of wisdom that comes from this section. And then the second one is a quote that comes from Prophet Muhammad. And while we're going through this, what I want us to be thinking about and focusing on is, what do these texts teach us about the price of participating in society? Like what's the ante? If anyone's ever played like an online poker game or something, don't gamble, but ante is table stakes. It's what you pay at the beginning to be able to join the game. So if society is the game, what do these two texts teach us about the price of participating in society? And I'll toss that in the chat just so you, again, you visual learners can hold that with you. And can we have a reader for, maybe the person can read both of the texts. Natalie, why don't you go?
Poor non-Jews should be supported along with poor Jews. The non-Jewish sick should be visited along with the Jewish sick, and their dead should be buried along with the Jewish dead for the sake of the paths of peace. Should I read the second one too?
Yes.
Okay. One who sleeps on a full stomach while their neighbors go hungry is not one of us.
So those are two, I think, moving quotes. I would like to give a little extra framing on the top one. It's talking about in a Jewish context, in a Jewish society. And I think that, but it speaks to much more. Shadia wrote, making sure that everyone is equal. Yeah. Wouldn't that be like, that's what I want my society to be based on. That's what I want.
Do you mind if I add something, Sam?
Yeah, go for it.
I was looking at this, and I think that's something that has been coming up a lot, MLK weekend, and something that really MLK himself, who was a Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., also really emphasized that what you're talking about with fairness and equity, that sometimes that doesn't mean everyone gets the same. It does. I think this really emphasizing that this means that sometimes certain people, you have to put extra effort in to help people in your society who need that. And if those around us might need a little extra help, then the correct response is to provide this help, no questions asked. And so fairness, yeah, often means giving people what they need rather than giving everyone the exact same.
Mm-hmm.
And that was just really coming up with these quotes as well.
And Ariana, you're coming with some strong wisdom today. The second part that you also said, having an important, everyone has an equal and important role to make sure that everyone has what they need. So it's not just about making sure that everyone gets what they need. It's also making sure that everyone's voice is heard and making that happen. And everyone feels valued and acknowledged that they actually can be of use and of help. So bringing it in on both sides, thanks. And Karen wrote, taking care of the needs of others. Yeah, these are all things that should be the baseline for what we need. And in our country, sadly, it's not always that way. It actually often is not that way. But through organizations like Hunger Free America that we can work with, and other nonprofits and other organizations and non-organizations that are working to make the world a better place, we can show what we want this country to look like, what we want this society to look like. Alana, should we go straight to the reflection questions or should we do this last piece? Because we're having to switch in what the programming is going to look like.
Yeah, I think we can. We can also go to I think we can do this last piece. Yeah, we definitely have time for.
Okay, cool. Oh, the reflection questions are for after anyway.
Yeah.
So I want to introduce this last concept here, which is another piece of Jewish wisdom. That's where I come from. That's what I know. So I hope that you'll bear with me if that's not your thing. And if it is your thing or you're curious, I hope that this is an opportunity for you. This is I would say, visual description, but ladder of tzedakah. Tzedakah is a Hebrew word that means somewhere between charity and justice, sort of in a ladder. And we sort of, At the bottom is sort of not the attitude, not the spirit, not the approach that we want to give. And at the top is sort of, this is what's going to create the best, most equitable world. So let's, just for time, I think I'm going to have us go from the bottom up. I'll read through them. And the question that we want to ask is, how can food justice be addressed at each of that you've experienced or others? And then we're going to talk a little bit about, when we get to our service opportunity, we're going to get a little bit more information, and you'll get to see how this fits into this construct that we're sharing. So at the bottom is someone who serves, who gives from themselves reluctantly and with regret. It's a person who's like, I guess I'll do it because I think I'm supposed to, but I really don't want to, and I'm not giving it my all. So what's the attitude that we're bringing in our approach to service and to serving others? The next level up is graciously, but less than one should. So you give and you're happy about it, your contribution, the way you're giving back, but you know that you can give more and you don't. Number 3 is giving as much as you should, but only after being asked. So this is telling us we should have an orientation towards being proactive, for seeking out and understanding the needs that exist in our world and approaching our giving in that way, whether it's giving of time, of money, or other things. So being proactive on that. Then the next level is being proactive before being asked, giving before being asked. Number 5, without knowing to whom one gives, but the recipient knows the identity of the donor. So this adds another layer of anonymity. Are you doing it for the accolades? Are you doing it for so that your name gets put up in a shiny plaque in a building? Are you doing it for your college resume? It's not to say that these things are bad, but to acknowledge that those are extrinsic motivators, and we also want to make sure that we're motivated intrinsically so we continue to do this good and important work. Then the next is giving without making one's identity unknown, so being anonymous. I don't know if you've ever seen like a public radio thing where they said like anonymous donor. That's what they're talking about. Someone who gives and they want their name shared, and it could be for a lot of different reasons. Number 7, without knowing to whom one gives and the recipient does not know from whom they receive. So really building anonymity, and that hopefully means that people are doing it for the right reasons, and that they're not trying to seek a pat on the back or a warm feel, but really just for dedication towards a more, at the top, a person who helps another to become self-supporting. And to all of you all, what does this look like? What's an example of that? A person who helps another to become self-supporting. And maybe think about it in the context of food insecurity. Manel, go for it.
Yeah, so maybe giving another person resources through which they can get food, or yeah.
Awesome. Yeah. Connecting to those resources so it's self-sustaining, so that they don't have to rely and depend on charity, but they can be in control, like we were talking about before, like food sovereignty, being in control of your own food, your own life, all of those pieces, so that you could live it the way that's most meaningful for you. Ariana wrote in the chat, providing resources. Yeah, those can be material resources, they can be educational resources, lots of different things. There are so many reasons why someone might not be able to be self-supporting, and there are so many resources that can help to address that. I also see in the chat from Karen, giving someone a job if they are in the position to employ someone. Yeah, people giving that kind of support, like you hear the quote that I think people most often attribute to this or think about this is, give someone a fish, they will eat for a day. Teach someone to fish, they will eat for a lifetime. So that can look like providing supports through a job where they can then earn their income and get the resources to be able to live in a sustainable way. Going out of your way to serve others. Yeah. Love it, everyone. Okay. So those are the pieces that I wanted to share with us and have us sort of reflect on, think about beforehand, and set ourselves up as we're thinking about the service that we're going to do for the rest of our time together. I know that we're having a quick change of plan just because of the amazing volunteers who are doing work earlier today. So Lene, do you want to share a little bit about that and help guide us through?
Yeah, just quickly, after this, we'll spend like 10 minutes on some Q&A if folks have questions for Alana and Sam. But we had a phone banking event with the Biden or Presidential Inaugural Committee today, and they blew through all of our phone banking numbers, which is obviously great. But so for our volunteer portion, we'll be switching to a slightly different activity, but it does involve calling food pantries and food sites. So it's like similar to phone banking, except it's towards them and not towards individuals. So, but equally as important work, and we'll get into that a little bit later. But that's actually a good segue if Sam and Alana, you feel as if you've completed the presentation portion a bit, but that was excellent. Thank you so much. I feel like I learned a lot from that, and it was great to see people responding and the engagement in the chat and everything. So thank you, everyone. I just wanted to ask you guys one or two questions myself, and then maybe we can open it up to everyone if people have questions about anything we talked about, whether it's about Repair the World or about the topics we talked about. So we're kind of asking all of the folks in our presentations if they can maybe just speak, and perhaps you two could speak to it in terms of your work at Repair the World, like what Martin Luther King Jr.'s work and legacy mean to you, especially in the context of your work and all of that.
I think I'll share that. Actually, I'll share my screen again. I'll go to our first slide because that one helps to make my point in this case pretty well. And I don't know if Sam, you wanted to, if you wanted to, I don't want to, you just did a whole presentation, so I don't want to take.
You go ahead. I've spoken a lot.
Okay, good. I didn't want to step in and steal the limelight. But thank you for presenting, Sam. That was, I really enjoyed hearing how you brought all the materials together. And it really got the gears grinding, thinking about our service that we've been doing all weekend long, since this is a National Weekend of Service. And it is a National Weekend of Service because of Martin Luther King's legacy. And I think I would like to take some time to look at these quotes. They're both we don't have to really answer the questions if we don't want to, but if we can read these two quotes, one by Martin Luther King Jr. and one by Rabbi Hillel, they do a really great job at articulating the mission of Repair the World, as well as the personal responsibility that we have to service and to action to make this a more just world. Does anyone want to read out the quotes? If not, I can read it, but I would love to hear from someone who hasn't. Oh, Ariana?
Hi. Okay, I'll read them. It just went off the screen.
Did it just stop sharing? All right,
Yes.
There you go.
Okay. Beyond Vietnam, A Time to Break Silence, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. We are now faced with the fact that tomorrow is today. We are confronted with the fierce urgency of now. In this unfolding conundrum of life and history, there is such a thing as being too late. There is no time for apathy or complacency. This is a time for vigorous and positive action. Do you want me to read the next one?
Sure, that'd be great.
Okay, Rabbi Hillel.
Yep, Pirkei Avot.
Yeah, Pirkei Avot 1:14. If I am not for myself, who will be for me? If I am for myself alone, what am I? And if not now, when?
Yeah, thank you so much, Ariana. I think you can really, you can sense the urgency in these quotes and the emphasis on the timeline that we are working with. And I think it's easy to feel complacent and feel like the day-to-day can get in the way of our overall larger debt to society. But it's really grounding to remember Martin Luther King's legacy and the work that he did and the pressure that he put on society, which is often whitewashed, but was really radical pressure to change the way that we live. And that has not yet been lived out and been acted out as it should be. So I think that there's no reason to think that the quote is not just as relevant today as it was in the time that it was said.
Yeah, that's great. I really like that line, that there is such a thing as being too late. It's starting, it feels like that, like the time has passed already to be listening to all of these things. So
exactly.
Yeah, thank you. I don't know if Sam had anything to add before we move on from that.
Sure, I can add the quick thing when you ask that question is it makes me think a lot about when I was younger and I went to a lot of different MLK service opportunities and things like that, which was really meaningful for myself at the time. But they always called upon the legacy of Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel, who was a rabbi who was also around in the same time and had connections with and operated within and oftentimes would bring up the issue of civil rights in the context of the Jewish community, the civil rights movement, and how his name and his legacy is evoked so frequently, but that there's also, and that he did really amazing work. And what he did back then is not enough for the Jewish community to say, okay, great, we've done our part, see ya. That's not okay. That's not what it is. And so that's what really motivates me to continue engaging in this kind of work, both on MLK weekend, but also beyond.
Yeah, great. Well, thank you both for answering that. I do want to open up, before we pivot to the volunteer activity, I do want to open it up if anyone has any questions for Sam or Alana. Maybe we have time for 3 or 4 questions. I don't know how they'd feel if we run out of time. Maybe throw it in the chat and they could and they could respond to you privately as well.